Welcome to the webinar today. We're just going to wait a couple more moments for people to join the call. And welcome everyone to the webinar. We're just going to wait one more minute for people to welcome everybody. As it's 4 minutes past the hour, we're going to kick off the webinar series here. So I'd like to welcome you all to this ASEAN webinar series, and this is the second of a two-part series co-organised by Climate Bonds Initiative and Asia's Sustainable Finance Initiative. Last week's webinar was around sustainable transport financing. And this week's webinar is on the topic of financing here, who provide comments and case studies. And I would just like to briefly introduce the panelists before I hand over to my colleague Cedric, who's going to moderate the panel discussion itself. And the way we're conducting this is actually in a radio style. So we're going to, there's only a few slides, and we're going to keep this quite informal to have more of a dialogue and interactive discussion. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the panelists that we have here today. Cedric is going to provide an update, and he is the ASEAN Programme Manager of Climate Bonds Initiative, who's going to speak about the low carbon buildings criteria under Climate Bond Standard and other relevant standards. And then Jenny Calder from WWF, who's the global practice expert on energy efficiency, is going to provide introductory remarks. That will be followed by Esther, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer for City Developments Limited. Then we're going to turn over to Mr. Susanto, who's the Product Promoter on Smart Infrastructure Building Products at Siemens, Indonesia. And then Sumia Chakravartula will speak, who's the Deputy Director for ICLE, which is the local government sustainability network for South Asia. And finally, last but not least, Sing Yi Lau is going to speak as the Green Finance Lead for Southeast Asia for Carbon Trust, on Carbon Trust energy efficiency loans. So I would like to hand over now to my colleague Cedric, who is going to moderate this discussion today, which we're really looking forward to. Thanks, Cedric.
Thank you very much, Helena, and very glad to see you all today for these other new sessions of the ASEAN webinar series. So today we are talking about sustainable buildings in cities. And this is in the context of a very strong growth in thematic bonds, in particular green bonds, which are used by financial and non-financial issuers, in particular in ASEAN region, to finance new projects, and in particularly new buildings. Buildings and energy are the two most important sectors that are being financed through these new types of security. To give you an idea, last year, the amount of green bonds raised in ASEAN doubled from the previous year. And we see quite a diversity of projects being funded by these new instruments. In Singapore, green loans are taking a particular importance, especially for the real estate sector, as many developers are using these instruments to finance the renovation of some of their buildings. And we are very lucky today to have one of the most important developers here in Singapore, which has been a precursor of this trend. So how to issue green bonds, and in particular climate bonds, which the Climate Bonds Initiative is helping to develop. An issuer needs to prepare green projects which are eligible under the definitions. So the market is mostly organized around the green bond principles that were initially started by ICMA, the International Capital Markets Association. And the ASEAN region has itself its own version with the ASEAN Green Bond Principles. Then the issuer can engage a verifier to assess that the projects are indeed eligible. At this stage, Climate Bonds Initiative can offer a certification that helps the promotion of the green bond or the green loan. This is followed by a post-issuance report, which confirms that the proceeds have indeed been allocated to the right projects. And during the life of the bond or the loan, the issuer commits to report annually on the performance or on the impact of those bonds as well. So Climate Bonds Initiative has developed a criteria for green buildings. This is very important as globally and also in our region is responsible for a large part of greenhouse gas emissions. The criteria for buildings addresses commercial and residential buildings as well as retrofits, and it is organized with, first of all, an emission performance target, which is different for each city, and draws a trajectory towards a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 to zero emission. The starting point is the 15% most energy efficiency buildings in a city or region. So using this trajectory, issuers, for example, real estate developers, can develop a path towards the reduction of the greenhouse gas emissions from their buildings and qualify for this criteria, which will then help them to raise financing for their projects. So through this criteria, investors are able to select investments that are in line with the objectives of the Paris Agreement. Now I will turn to Jenny Calder from WWF, who is going to explain why it is important to look at sustainable buildings within cities and how our cities are going to be transformed, in particular after this crisis that we are currently experiencing where people have been confined at home. Jenny?
Thank you, Cedric. Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody from Paris. It's a pleasure to provide some opening remarks here. Before we get into the finance questions, I wanted to recall a few key trends which are relevant to this discussion. Firstly, we are an increasingly urban species. Today, there's 3.5 billion people, so that's more than half of the world's population living in cities. And by 2050, that figure will double to just under 7 billion people. And a large part of that urban growth is taking place in Asia, where incomes are rising. And of course, hotter average and extreme temperatures is going to drive an absolute explosion in the demand for cooling and notably air conditioners. So investing in sustainable buildings that allow Asian countries to meet energy needs without further warming the planet is going to be an absolutely critical challenge for the region in the years to come. And from an energy perspective, a sustainable building is a highly energy efficient one, and one that draws its power from renewable sources. At WWF, we found that the combination of highly efficient buildings with rooftop solar PV is a great way of leaning towards zero energy buildings in Asia specifically. But I'd like to focus here really on the energy efficiency aspect, for which there's a huge potential in Asia, and not least because of the benefits associated to more efficient buildings in this time and age. Firstly, these buildings reduce the need to build and operate expensive power generation infrastructure, so the power plants themselves, but also the transmission and distribution lines that go with them. Secondly, sustainable buildings and efficient ones contribute to clean air, both outdoors and indoors. And this obviously has huge health and well-being benefits, which is an asset that speaks to most in today's COVID context, where people are finding themselves spending a lot of time indoors. And lastly, they reduce operational and maintenance costs, which is also beneficial at a time where individuals' utility bills are increasing. So with energy efficient building sort of ticking so many boxes, there's a huge untapped potential to mobilize finance on this issue in Asia. And to close off these very short opening remarks, I'd like to highlight 3 barriers to financing for sustainable buildings. Firstly, many individuals and investors get put off by the higher upfront costs of energy efficiency improvements. But I think it's important to recall that these should systematically be weighed against the operational and maintenance savings that come from improving energy efficiency in buildings. And in certain cases, the return on investment can be relatively quick. Second barrier is that there are split incentives in the building sector. What I mean by this is that those who would bear the higher upfront cost of an energy efficient building, so its owner, doesn't necessarily reap the benefits of the upgrade. The occupier would. The last barrier I want to highlight is the issue of scale. Large investors typically won't be interested in an investment until it reaches several million dollars. And because the building sector is so fragmented, these investments tend to be smaller than that. But I think to finish on a positive note, despite these barriers, some actors are showing the way. And I'm particularly looking forward to hearing how some large investors, such as real estate investment trusts, and I know we have CDL participating today, for instance, have greened their portfolio, and how we can generalize this practice with other financial actors. So thank you. I'll leave it at that for the time being, and I look forward to our conversation.
Thank you very much, Jenny, for these introductory remarks. So let's now turn to a very significant actor here in Singapore of the real estate industry. Esther, you represent CDL, which has been actually a precursor in terms of developing a sustainable strategy for the group. Can you please tell us a little bit more about what you are doing?
Just start with, just reinforce what Jenny's message is. Actually, cities only occupy 2% of the landmass in the Earth, but account for 70% of greenhouse gas emission. Building and construction sector account for 39% of greenhouse gas, almost 40% of greenhouse gas emission. So what can, building, how we design, build and develop, and also how we construct as well as how we manage will make a big difference. And energy efficiency and green buildings go hand in hand together because especially in the tropics, and we are like 30 over degree every day. So the air conditions and all these are very important to facilitate, a comfortable thermal comfort of building users. So definitely, green building is our top priority as a developer, and we're also one of the major landlords in Singapore. So how we manage also can make a difference. According to our World Green Building Council, the global agenda is for all new building to be net zero by 2030. And by 2050, all old and new buildings should be net zero. So only by then we would be able to look at, how we can really achieve the 1.5 degree scenario. So for us, our green bond that we issued in April 2017, I would say is a natural progression of our sustainability journey started way back in 1995 with the ethos of conserving as we construct and also we manage. So since 2004, we already tracked and all our performance in terms of energy efficiency, water, waste, and the other ESG data as well. So green building has always been our top priority because that is our major core business. The green bond is actually, I would say that it has really great potential because it really helps us to tap into alternative financing stream to accelerate green building movement, and also how to working towards low carbons and in the longer run zero energy. It is definitely not easy, and for our top material issues based on our materiality study, the number one issue is actually innovation. Okay, and then energy efficiency and climate resilience. And all these are linked together because green building, resilient building means also energy efficient building, resource efficient building. And investment, innovations, technologies are not cheap. Without that, you can't make game-changing type of difference. So financing is very important along the value chain.
Esther, how do you respond to Jenny when she says that the incentives are falling to different people, not in the right order, I would say, because like she said, it falls on the owner of the building to do the transformation, but the benefactor of this transformation is the one leasing the building. So what value do you bring to, for example, the people who occupy your building?
Yeah, I would say that ESG integration and has been really shining. It shows resilience, especially over the last 4 months when the whole global economy is in a downturn. And I'm sure everybody have probably read about MSCI, BlackRock, all the reports to show that ESG indices and ESG funds have been growing tremendously. And I would say that only businesses with strong fundamental and resilient and sustainable business practices can survive, can weather the storms, which is whether it is climate risk or social or health risks that we are all facing. So the business case of ESG is very important. Whether I'm a tenant or I'm owner of the building, there is actually very strong business case. The cost of inaction will be is very evident. And in Singapore, the carbon tax has already implemented since January last year. So if you are our tenants, you also have a business case to present that you have strong ESG track record that will enable you to tap into the growing ESG investing market, and I mean for listed company especially, and even responsible lending is growing tremendously. Banks may write you off if you don't present a sustainable business model. And similarly, sustainable insurance is growing very strong, as you can read from the news that there are quite a number of global alliances that amplifying the voices of investors, financiers, and insurers. So whether you are an asset building owner or you are a tenant or you are even an occupier, so long as you are in the business, you will have to really, you can't ignore ESG. It's no longer non-financial anymore. ESG has strong financial impact and very strong business case.
But also from the cost of running a building, for example, we see the rise of the price of water, or I guess more use of energy as well. So I guess for the occupiers as well, if you reduce the energy consumption or the water consumption, it's good news, right?
Mm-hmm. In Singapore, the common area air condition is covered by the landlord, and within office hours similarly, that lighting and other facility are paid by the tenants. So of course, water, if you are like a big F&B outlets and all that, definitely your cost, implication is very, very strong, because for us, for Singapore, we have raised our water price by 30% over the last 2 years. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to turn to Pak Susanto, who represents PT Siemens Indonesia. So you represent the service provider and the developer of new technologies for buildings. We would be interested to know what types of systems you offer your clients to increase the energy efficiency of buildings. And I think you have some slides as well, which I'm going to show during your response. Pak Susanto?
Thank you very much, Cedric, for the time. Yeah, actually, this is a roadshow from Siemens in Indonesia. I think more than 165, starting from installation for the pointer telegraph until now we do automation and digitalization. I think next slide maybe. Yeah, starting from this, right now we understanding about the building. Yeah, we talk about the building energy efficiency. So from this, we know that building consume about 40% worldwide energy consumption and also produce more than 21% of CO2. So this is also when the building operation, energy cost is more than 40%. So this is a big amount. So we do energy efficiency regarding the energy consumption. We Siemens as the the automation provider and also a digitalization company, yeah, we offering the automation system to save the energy. Next slide maybe. Yeah, actually when we do energy saving, we have a potential in energy saving in building, like we do the control system or we change the product like the HVAC and then the control system, the motor, actuator, and also maybe for the power generation, or we can do like the change for the building envelope according the green building concept. But for Siemens, because me as a building product promoter, we do the control system. Why we do this? Because this is the high result, and also yeah, we talk about money. This is we have a return of investment quickly. We install the building automation. They have a saving potential around 5 to 30%, but the payback period maybe only 1 until 5 years. So this is our focusing on the Siemens developing product to energy saving. Next slide. Yeah, this is the range product portfolio from Siemens. Yeah, when we support the energy saving. Firstly, we do the building automation system. And then beside the building automation system, we do control and monitoring, especially in ASEAN, maybe in ASEAN or especially in Indonesia. The air conditioning is consume higher energy. So do a lot of things in the HVAC system to do saving. We do the control system, and also we have a part or the equipment that support HVAC system, like the thermostat, room thermostat. We controlling every room, single room according the demand flow, and also we have a sensor with the accuracy more sensitive, because if not sensitive, yeah, increasing 1 degree Celsius, this is consume higher energy. Besides that, we also have fire safety. Yeah, we combine with comfort product and also fire safety. So the customer or the maybe a tenant, they feel comfort and also safe. So this is our line product portfolio to support the building owner and tenant, also help to saving energy.
And how is it in Indonesia? Does the government or the local municipalities force landlords to do this transformation? Or is it mostly driven by the cost savings that you are referring to?
Yeah, previously the building owner like that focusing on the cost saving. Yeah. But right now government also more focused to green energy. So every government building and also a public building, they push about the green building concept. But right now in Indonesia, yeah, concept of the green building scheme, like maybe decrease for the tax, something like that, still on process lah. So from government only push building owner to do the saving energy, but on the processing like the financial and then the feedback after the building owner do the green energy, still gap on this. So right now, yeah, still develop about the regulation for this.
Thank you very much. So as Jenny was explaining, the potential in Asia is very large in terms of investment in green buildings. So I would like to turn to Sumia, who has an overview of the region through the partnership that you are working for. Can you please give us a little bit more detail, first of all, on this partnership and also what you're doing with local governments?
Sure, thank you, Cedric. Yeah, we represent, I represent here today on the webinar, the Asia-LEDS Partnership, the Asia Low Emission Development Strategies Partnership. This is a platform where we bring together national government entities, subnational entities, partners, financiers, and think tanks, and other international as well as local institutions which are working on all aspects of low emissions development. The partnership intends to provide technical support and to enable peer learning between subnational and national entities. That is the reason why the partnership exists. Coming to what does the partnership have to do with building energy efficiency? We currently run a community of practice on building energy efficiency, where we have about 15 countries participating in the community of practice. This is about, I think, 90 members. 90 members coming from think tanks, coming from national governments, 15 national governments, representatives of 40 organizations who are part of the community of practice. There is a discussion, ongoing discussion in the community of practice, focusing on 3 different aspects. One is on the policy aspect. So we've heard from Susanto just now that there is a need to beef up local policies. And what we see and hear from our membership is that there is a need to synchronize and to converge local policies at the national level. So we are able to develop scale, and we are able to provide enough we are able to provide mechanisms, both from technical assistance standpoint as well as from a financing standpoint. So national governments are able to provide local authorities, subnational authorities with relevant mechanisms to implement large-scale solutions. And I can give you a very concrete example. For example, we're looking at one of the cities in central India. It's called Nagpur, where they are looking at a social housing building stock of about 4,000 buildings and 4,000 dwelling units. And we are currently looking at an analysis of the building designs for about 1,000 of those dwelling units, and looking at all kinds of assessment, looking at shading, looking at lighting analysis, looking at the energy use, and looking at the facade and the materials used, the renewable energy integration potential, and then looking at standards that the local authority can develop, which can then be used for the remaining dwelling units that they to construct. The local authority then would bring out a set of guidelines, which are also being prepared by the local authority, and finally we'll come up with a bylaw. So this is the bylaw which would integrate all these different aspects, and the local authority would then ensure that all the social housing that is built from now on would meet these regulations. So there is a lot of discussion in these communities of practice where there is a sharing of experience on how policies, local policies can be enacted, how the national governments can come on board. One of the very strong cases we've seen, for example, is from Mongolia, where 300 buildings, there is a Mongolia Green Fund that is looking to provide financial assistance for retrofitting of 300 buildings in the capital city there. And there are several of these aggregator mechanisms. There is also the Asia-LEDS Partnership also works on communities of practice, which is focusing solely on financing. And right now, we are trying to bring a lot of the practice, a lot of the knowledge, and a lot of the information that subnational entities require to kind of aggregate these projects. And we've heard previous speakers, I think Esther was talking about it, previous speakers speaking about not having the scale to individual building owners not having the scale, or even if you have a real estate firm not having enough scale. So what are these aggregator models? How can the subnational authorities work with financing institutions? How can we look at green bonds to fund these large scale projects? So this is the kind of knowledge that the ALP brings to its network. And we have peer learning sessions, we have trainings on specific tools. If there is a specific request on technical assistance on specific, if for example, a subnational entity or a national entity would like to develop a policy. So the ALP is able to provide technical resources to be able to do that. We are working with the National Bank in Mongolia to actually develop their financial banking system in such a way that they prioritize projects which have a mitigation benefit, and green buildings is one of the largest portfolio that they have. So these are things that the ALP can help the membership, and I think I'll stop here, and if there's specific questions, happy to take them.
And Sumia, I understand the discussion around policies and local governments creating standards, but what about the private institutions, like companies like Siemens, for example, who are actually day-to-day speaking to clients and providing solutions? How do you establish a link between the two?
Thank you, Cedric. Very, very relevant question. To be honest, that is something that's ongoing for us. In the membership, in the ALP membership, we do have the private entities which are partners, but the ALP is a neutral platform. To be able to bring the subnational national authorities and the private players on a neutral platform and focusing solely on technology provision, and to be able to translate what the private sector is saying into what the government sector needs is something that we are working on right now. It doesn't happen very efficiently. The private sector wants to see results in 2 weeks and the government takes 6 months. So this is something that's always a point of tension, and government policies, unless you really see them on paper, tend to change, at least in the Asian scenario. With changing regimes, with changing officials, with changing priorities. These are things that keep moving, and we see that there is a lot of tension there as well for the private sector to move in and to be able to scale up. But having said that, there has been a recognition by the national authorities and of course the subnationals that without significant private sector involvement, both from a technical aspect and a financial aspect, it is impossible to achieve the scale that the government would want to achieve. So that bit of it has been cracked already, but to operationalize this in more efficient ways is work in progress. The ALP provides a platform for them to come together. We have in-person workshops that happen, and we have the ALP forum that happens every year, where we bring the private sector together with the national entities, and there are meetings that are conducted, and then the ALP helps follow up with on these partnerships. So we follow up with the local government, we follow up with the national government that was interested, and bring them together, and then they carry forward the dialogue. So this is something that the ALP also provides as a platform.
Thank you very much, Sumia. As we can see, there's a lot of work going on behind the scene to try to create some synergies and to show by example as well. But there is also some international support. And I would like to turn to Sini now, because through the support of the UK government and the LCEP program, there is actually financial means that are put towards changing the way we look at energy efficiency. Sini, could you please give us a little bit more details?
Hi, Cedric, and thank you so much for having me at this webinar. It's been a very exciting discussion so far. I'm Sini. I'm the Green Finance Lead of Southeast Asia at the Carbon Trust Singapore. So my role involves delivering and expanding our current portfolio of green finance services in the region. As a brief introduction for everyone, the Carbon Trust is a not-for-dividend sustainability consultancy with the mission to accelerate the move to a sustainable low-carbon economy. We operate as a group structure of commercial service companies owned by a parent organization that is a not-for-profit entity, which we invest any surplus into activities that further our mission. Over the past 19 years, the Carbon Trust has developed an established track record in helping to accelerate the deployment of energy efficiency measures and technologies We have first-hand experience of working with hundreds of organizations on the identification and implementation of energy efficiency measures. Our key client groups include businesses and public sector organizations, financial institutions, and suppliers. I think we see in Singapore's context that the government does have a very huge role in driving the whole green buildings agenda, and at the same time, we see room for the private sector to play a larger role to help scale up the efforts. So based on our observations in the UK, the best way to catalyze change is to prove that energy efficient, low carbon buildings are not only necessary, but also highly profitable. In 2010, we came up with the low carbon workplace concept, and we brought this idea to life by setting up the LCW Property Fund with our partners, namely fund manager Columbia Threadneedle Investments and property developer Stanhope. The fund buys commercial office buildings in the UK with the potential to become modern, efficient offices with low energy costs and improve employee well-being and productivity. The Carbon Trust leverages on our expertise to refurbish our acquired buildings, and we provide ongoing support to our occupiers where we help them minimize their energy costs and carbon emissions. Energy and carbon performance are then monitored and assessed against the Carbon Trust low carbon workplace standard, and the occupiers that successfully meet the criteria are awarded with certification to the standard. The fund has grown to 7 buildings, totaling 274,000 square feet, and is valued at about £260 million. In many ASEAN countries, we see that shift towards urbanization and green buildings, and we are exploring the viability of rolling out a similar fund in Singapore and demonstrate that energy efficient, low carbon buildings also make commercial sense in this part of the world. We welcome your thoughts and feedback on this topic. And also building on what Cedric mentioned, we are in Singapore's office also working on this UK government funded Prosperity Fund ASEAN Low Carbon Energy Program. So this is a £15 million program that started in April last year and targets 6 ASEAN member states on green finance and energy efficiency. The 6 countries are Indonesia, Malaysia, Myanmar, the Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam. And one of the work stream is the Green Bonds work stream, where the Carbon Trust may assist issuers in establishing and adopting a green bond framework that complies with a green bond standard, or we may provide assurance services to issuers for their green bonds. The associated cost of advisory and assurance services provided by the Carbon Trust will be covered under the ASEAN LSAP. We noticed that the green bonds issuance has been spectacular in terms of the growth in the past few years, but we are not seeing as many energy efficiency projects benefiting from this issuance as compared to their renewable energy counterparts. So with this LSAP program, we are hoping to encourage more green bond issuances towards energy efficiency projects and mobilize the large amounts of capital that is needed to bridge the gaps. At the Carbon Trust webinar last Thursday, our speakers also echoed similar sentiments, and they identified the most promising opportunities in the buildings and transport sectors. So we hope that you'll get in touch with us if you are looking to issue green bonds in any of the 6 ASEAN countries and support the development in this part of the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cindy. And indeed, the financing aspect is a very important side of the transformation that is currently underway. We have some questions coming in, and someone is asking what role do financial institutions need to play to transform these opportunities into projects, and what are the barriers that they face? And someone else is asking whether there's any way to aggregate small projects to increase the impact of the transformation. So I would like to ask Pak Susanto, in Indonesia, the clients that you're speaking with, what is the financing that they have access to, or do they have a problem accessing financing for those energy efficiency projects? Sorry, we cannot hear you.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so far in Indonesia, when we talk to the end customer or something like that, usually they, for the financing, using themselves. I mean, because when they find out financing, for example, like a bank or financial services, something like that in Indonesia, the interest fee still high. So this is also problem for the financing collection from a building owner, something like that. So usually when we do the energy saving, we do for the when after we assessment for the building, usually from the small project first, for example, like that. So after that, yeah, because difficult to find out the financial, something like that. So after they have a saving a cost, then they do next project, something like that, Cedric.
Thank you very much. And I would like to ask you, Esther, in terms of Singapore, we see a number of banks coming out with new products or new commitment that they will increase either their lending to SMEs or their green loans as well. Does CDL take advantage of this new trend? And you've issued a green bond already. You've also contracted some green loans. So how do you see green finance helping in this transformation? You're on mute.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for the question. And I would like to actually expand on what Suma just now shared. Partnerships and policies are really key driver for sustainable financing. Okay, if I could just look at the big picture first before I address your question. In Singapore, actually MAS introduced a $2 billion green investment program last year. And that actually has really helped to accelerate the movement, the growth of sustainable financing. And it's not just about financing, but also about banking. And MAS actually encouraged our financial institution to consider and embrace ESG in making their decision in their lending. So all these are actually key driver for corporates to adopt ESG integration and also to accelerate their climate action and whether it is renewable energy efficiency or waste management and all that. So as you captured the data that in 2019 the sustainable finance growth is tremendous in ASEAN region, and actually 55% is actually issued and or secured by Singapore. And I would say that after the policies have, I really see the tremendous growth of the adoption of not just bond, but actually I would say the biggest growth is on the sustainability linked loans or green loans. So for us, after in 2018, we issue our 500 million new green development loans. That is for us to invest in green feature, green building development for new condominium and projects. And last year, I also issued this Sdg Innovation Loan. As I mentioned before, innovation technologies are very important, but you do need upfront investment. So this Sdg Innovation Loans is for us to not just purchase or procure, develop any type of innovation. It has to serve at least one or more SDG, whether it is climate action, whether it is green infrastructure, waste, energy efficiency, And so I think that I would say sustainable finance really unlock a lot of opportunities, especially to embrace SDG. And if you look at the list of the green loans that over the last few years in Singapore, most of it are actually adopted by real estate or related company. And not all of them are large cap companies. They're also, the larger size of SME, not exactly the smaller size. And there are more and more banks, I still remember in 2016 when I, started to explore, issuing a green bond, I have to explain to bankers that is what exactly is green building. And, but now I'm sure that all the bankers are very savvy about what is green building, what is, energy efficiencies and all that. So partnership is another driver that actually we partner with government and also NGO. We call it the Singapore Sustainability Academy that involves the support of 6 government agencies with an NGO called the Sustainable Energy Association Singapore, SEAS, which actually have tied up with ADB to provide capacity building, knowledge building, and also look into innovation and new green energy, renewable energy technology. We actually partnered since 2017 in June. So they actually conduct all the training classes, interaction, networking, exchange of like, you know, ideas and technology. And for CDL, we actually build and, you know, this academy, make it, actually it's a zero energy building, use extensive, you know, PV and solar panel on the rooftop. And since its opening, it has been really just powered by solar energy. So there are a lot of, you know, partnership, whether it is policy, whether it is, you know, a business case, you know, there's a lot of driver. I'm really very positive and optimistic about the, you know, the potential of green financing and sustainable financing moving forward. And of course,
Esther,
there are also...
is this financing mostly for big developers, large corporations, or do you think that we will also see some financing for individual houses or flats, for example?
I don't think it has gone to that extent yet for retail, and there actually the issue are mostly like other part of the world is like financial institution and large corporations or the larger size of medium SMEs. We do have contractor, we do have energy companies that have embraced sustainable financing, not just developer or asset owner.
Someone is asking whether anyone on the panel has experience working with the development banks that are quite active in ASEAN in the region. I don't know if anyone has experience on that.
Cedric, I'm happy to jump in if that's possible with you.
Yes, sure.
Right, so I think that is something that is an area where the Carbon Trust has a lot of experience and strengths in working with NGBs. So I would cite one example where we were looking at more innovative ways to unlock financing in this part of the world, which is through a climate auction model. And this is meant to be a results-based approach to incentivize private investment. So that was back in 2017, where the World Bank commissioned the Carbon Trust to carry out a study to understand how a pilot auction facility, or we call it a PAF mechanism, could be used to catalyze energy and resource efficiency in the residential building sector, focusing on new build developments. The first phase of the study analyzed the potential geographies, market sectors that could benefit from PAF, and Indonesia was one of the 6 countries that was studied in that phase. So what we did was we developed a country profile of the local green building market. We, in our analysis, identified the main public and private institutions that were responsible for green buildings, and we held extensive consultations to identify where the auction mechanism could be most additional and successful. And the second phase, we developed a proposal to implement that mechanism, and we explored the financial costs and benefits of the intervention in the Indian market. This included an extensive review of the green building incentives that exist in India at the national and state levels. So if I could give everyone a snapshot of how this auction model works. So there are 3 elements to this. So first, price guarantees are offered to private sector companies for future climate auction, and the pricing for those results are determined by an auction. These price guarantees provide holders the right, but not the obligation, to sell future climate results to the facility at a predetermined price. An auction platform is good because it provides a transparent means for allocating and determining the value of the price guarantees. Companies compete in the auction and review the minimum price required to make the predefined green investments. This maximizes the impact of public funds and achieves the highest volume of climate benefits per dollar. Second, the funds are only disbursed to the auction winners once the climate results have been generated and independently verified. So this allows the climate funders to be certain that the results are achieved before they make payment. Third, the risk is shared between the public and private sector for green investments. The price guarantees must be purchased by the private sector auction winners at a premium price, which is paid upfront before they receive the price guarantee contracts. Auction winners have a greater incentive to deliver future climate results when they have paid for the right to deliver them.
Thank you very much, Cindy. Very, very interesting indeed. There is another question on whether there is any cost analysis of delivering an energy efficiency building versus a non-energy efficient building, and how building developers can be incentivized to deliver a green building. I don't know, maybe Jenny at WWF, have you done such analysis, or do you think that this is something that would deliver positive results?
So at WWF, we haven't done such analysis as far as I'm aware, but I think that one of the difficulties with the building sector, it's very case-by-case basis, and it has to take into context the, you know, the local context. But I definitely think that, you know, there's, as Esther was saying and others, that there is a business case to be made around energy efficiency buildings. And making that case clear to developers, I think, will definitely sort of advance the cause. I think one of the big barriers around sustainable buildings and energy efficient ones is that the business case isn't always well understood. We talk quite vaguely about returns on investments, and as Susanto presented, some return on investments are very quick if you're on looking at you know, lighting or, you know, appliance level sort of energy efficiency measures. But if you're talking about building envelopes, and I think what Susanto presented is you've got a payback of 10 to 60 years. And that's, you know, I think from an investor perspective, 10 years is probably acceptable, 60 is a bit more tricky. So I think I think doing these cost analysis, you know, energy efficient versus non-energy efficient should almost be systematic and done at the project level. And that's something that's, you know, a barrier, certainly for investors, because that's obviously quite resource intensive. So.
And Jenny, there are some other questions saying that whether the material, the energy consumption of creating the material that is used for building should also be taken into account. What do you think?
100% agree. That's when we talk about energy efficient buildings, we could look at just the operational sort of energy consumption of the building, but that's kind of only part of the iceberg. And I think going forward, when we talk about sustainable buildings, we really have to take into consideration the energy consumption that's linked to generating the materials, the actual construction site. Having a whole life cycle analysis of the building, I think is something we definitely need to get stronger on. And that's just looking from an energy perspective. You can also look into the resource efficiency of a building, which materials we use and their environmental impacts beyond greenhouse gas emission. We're talking about rare earth materials, metals, etc., which carry a huge environmental cost. And so we need to bring into these conversations circular economy and working towards, you know, recycled materials. And I think when we talk about these discussions, we start to realize how complex a field building sector is, and from an environmental perspective, the different issues associated to that. So I think it's a really great question, and one we have to keep in mind. It's not just about the life of the building while it's being used. It's how it's constructed, how it's used, and then ultimately how it's recycled in a way. So yeah, I think it's a great question.
Could I jump in from a practitioner's perspective? First, the first question about energy efficiency. Okay, as you know that BCA, the Singapore Green Mark, is our national green building standard. It's similar to LEED and BREEAM and all that. So for Green Mark, certification level is mandatory for any, you know, developer who wants to build, you know, or who want to make conduct a major retrofitting. That's mandatory. There is Gold, Gold Plus, and Platinum, similar to LEED. So for a highest level, Platinum level, it is normally about 30 to 40% more efficient in terms of energy. So you can translate it to actual saving. So for us, we have our office building are almost 95% are Green Mark Platinum level, the highest level. So over the last 6-7 years, we saved about $28 million in terms of utility bill. But that is only the utility bills. But what we are looking at is also, you know, the capital value of a building and also the environmental cost. And whatever savings in terms of like energy usage, you can also translate it to, you know, carbon tax. In Singapore, carbon tax is now started with very mild, you know, $5 per ton. But we are also operating in 29 countries. We are not just looking at Singapore alone, where carbon tax is much higher in other parts of the world. So definitely the commercial case is there, and also the cost of inaction is very high. because I mean, I link it to just now the sustainable investing, financing, and also insurance. We also have done our SBTI. You have to set target in order to improve your performance, your ESG performance, especially energy efficiency. So just to link to the second question about the sustainable building materials, which is getting more and more important now in the whole conversation. Embodied carbon is still relatively new. A lot of developers and real estate players, or especially suppliers, are still trying to grapple with this new term of like what is sustainable material, what is embodied carbon, and all that. For those companies who have actually get their carbon reduction target validated by SBTI, you would know that actually scope 3 is getting more and more important. If you report to CDP, similarly, SBTI, sustainable material, and scope 3 is also part of the questions. So we have to really look at the whole life cycle, like Jenny say, from how do you engage the supply chain to get to how do you source your materials, and to technology, to to engagement of the users and all that. In fact, when you talk about efficiency, it's not just about what sort of adopting of solar panels or whatever. Actually, when you design the building, you can also already look at how you can reduce the use of air condition by tapping capturing the natural ventilation, the wind and the light, and even adopting like green walls. You can really help to bring down the thermal, the heat and all that. We have one condominium, we have actually achieved the tallest, highest green vertical garden in the world in 2017 and 2016. The green wall shielded these 48 units, and over 1 year's survey, it has actually proven to bring down the temperature by up to 3 degrees, from 1 to 3 degrees. That means the residents, of these 48 units, they will be really relying less on air condition. And all these are actually with data and surveys supporting it, because this building is facing the reservoir. Look, the nature reserve look very pretty, but it is west facing. West facing means you have a lot of afternoon sun. That means when you come back from work, you will have to really full blast your air condition. So you may not need really like high-tech solutions. Sometimes it's just some, you can look for like, greenery. When you go to take a walk in the garden, you will feel that, when you're in the rainforest, you will feel much cooler than you'll come out on the concrete wall. So there are solutions right from day one when you design the building, design on the ventilation, the orientation, to how you build. We also have technology that have actually, the prefabricated, prefinished technology has helped us raise productivity by 40%. That means you will have to save a lot more man days, over the 3-year construction. Save man days, save, resources means you also have lower the carbon footprint of the whole process. So of course, how you manage the building is, there are also a lot of technology can help you. And, data collection is important to have like, adopt a preventive maintenance. And there are a lot of, I really like what Jenny said, that building business is really, really very complex. From the day you get the land to the day you redeveloped it, there are just a lot of issues or best practices that you can adopt to lower the carbon footprint. Yeah.
And there is also the importance of the building standards that you mentioned. We heard recently on one of our webinars that OCBC Bank extended a loan to a Myanmar-based property developers because their building was following the Singapore BCA standard. So they were very familiar with it and able to offer the new financing. We have another question here, whether there are many cities in the region that are tapping the opportunity of energy efficiency to lower their energy costs. And also we have another one whether specific local level policies are seen as more impactful than national one on reducing energy use in buildings. Maybe Sumia, maybe you may have something to say on that?
Yes, Cedric, I think, yes, I think short answer is most definitely. Cities are looking at energy efficiency measures. There is, if you put renewable energy and energy efficiency, I think renewable energy is more visible, and it's something that's preferred it's a faster way of doing it, because energy efficiency, it's not just the new buildings, but retrofits take time. That being said, I think cities are the EPC model, for example, the energy performance contracting model, energy savings contracting models. These are models that are working really well, and we are seeing at scale implementation through these financing models. In terms of policies, what we are seeing, especially for cities, I'm not talking of Singapore, I'm talking of cities which do not have the financial benefits that Singapore has, but for smaller cities and cash-strapped cities, what we're seeing is cities like to develop their own green building policies and their own green building guidelines, so that the costs of certification and the costs of compliance is something that's a huge barrier for small-time builders and for the retail sector. So what we're seeing is cities like to come up with, based on their own context, they would like to come up with green building norms, green building guidelines in terms of appliances, in terms of guidance for envelope, in terms of orientation of buildings, and sometimes in terms of design. And these guidelines vary for the retail sector and for the commercial sector. And this is seen to be what we are seeing as evidence is that this is the most effective way of bringing in scale. While you have, for example, you may have the National Cooling Action Plan, which is the national government policy, but to translate it into city implementation, to translate it into local implementation, unless we have very specific guidance, which is context specific. So Jenny had mentioned very rightly that these things need to be context specific. Large countries have extremely different geography, very different climatic conditions. And so it becomes important to translate all of this into subnational and local level policies. In terms of the benefits, it is very important to study from the local government's perspective. Very important to do an analysis and do a study of what is the impact of the existing building practice. For example, the 4,000 building units that I was talking about were prefabricated RCC, and we saw that from the design there is a potential of reducing energy consumption if you change that material by almost 60%. And you could bring in thermal comfort, you could reduce indoor temperatures by about 1.5 degrees. So a real hard look from local government's perspective on the prevalent construction trends, and then putting out guidance on that has tremendous benefit and impact.
Thank you very much, Sumia. This is extremely interesting overall. Unfortunately, we have already exceeded our allocated time, so I would like to thank all the panelists for this interesting discussion and turn back to Helena for some closing remark.
Great, thanks a lot, Cedric. And it's really interesting and great to hear this discussion. And hopefully we can continue the discussion. We will follow up as well with people's details for the different organisations featured in case people have any specific queries and questions. And we will also record the session in case people want to review this afterwards. I'd like to thank everyone for coming. It was a really great session. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.